And unlock the door. Send a girl down to the freezer and have her bring up all the live cold virus she can find. Get us some inoculated monkeys and a few dozen dogs. He turned to Coffin and stopped sniveling. You're the big publicity man around here. You're going to handle the screaming masses, whether you like it or not.
What are you going to do?
I haven't the faintest idea, said Philip, but whatever I do is going to cost you your shirt. We're going to find out how to catch a cold again if we have to die. It was an admirable struggle, and a futile one. They sprayed their noses and throats with enough pure culture of virulent live virus to have condemned an ordinary man to a lifetime of sneezing, watery-eyed misery. They didn't develop a sniffle among them. They mixed 6 different strains of virus and gargled the extract, spraying themselves and every inoculated monkey they could get their hands on with the vile-smelling stuff. Not a sneeze. They injected it hypodermically, intradermally, subcutaneously, intramuscularly, and intravenously. They drank it. They bathed in the stuff. But they didn't catch a cold. Maybe it's the wrong approach, Jake said one morning. Our body defenses are keyed up to the top performance right now. Maybe if we break them down, we can get somewhere. They plunged down that alley with grim abandon. They starved themselves. They forced themselves to stay awake for days on end until exhaustion forced their eyes closed in spite of all they could do. They carefully devised vitamin-free, protein-free, mineral-free diets that tasted like library paste and smelled worse. They wore wet clothes and sopping shoes to work, turned off the heat and threw windows open to the raw winter air. Then they re-sprayed themselves with the live cold virus and waited reverently for the sneezing to begin. It didn't. They stared at each other in gathering gloom. They'd never felt better in their lives. Except for the smells, of course. They'd hoped that they might presently get used to them, but they didn't. Every day it grew a little worse. They began smelling smells they'd never dreamed existed. Noxious smells, cloying smells, smells that drove them gagging to the sinks. Their nose plugs were rapidly losing their effectiveness. Meal times were nightmarish ordeals. They lost weight with alarming speed, but they didn't catch cold. I think you should all be locked up, Ellie Dawson said severely as she dragged her husband, blue-faced and shivering, out of an icy shower one bitter morning. You've lost your wits. You need to be protected against yourselves. That's what you need. You don't understand, Philip moaned. We've got to catch cold. Why? Ellie snapped angrily. Suppose you don't. What's going to happen? We had 300 students march on the laboratory today, Philip said patiently. The smells were driving them crazy, they said. They couldn't even bear to be close to their best friends. They wanted something done about it, or else they wanted blood. Tomorrow we'll have them back and 300 more. And they were just the pilot study. What's going to happen when 15 million people find their noses going bad on them? He shuddered. Have you seen the papers? People are already going around sniffing like bloodhounds, and now we're finding out what a thorough job we did. We can't crack it, Ellie. We can't even get a toehold. Those antibodies are just doing too good a job. Well, maybe you can find some uncle bodies to take care of them, Ellie offered vaguely. Look, don't make bad jokes. I'm not making jokes. All I want is a husband back who doesn't complain about how everything smells and eats the dinners I cook and doesn't stand around in cold showers at 6 a.m. I know it's miserable, he said helplessly, but I don't know how to stop it. He found Jake and Coffin in tight-lipped conference when he reached the lab. I can't do it anymore, Coffin was saying. I've begged them for time. I've threatened them. I've promised them everything but my upper plate. I can't face them again. I just can't." "We only have a few days left," Jake said grimly. "If we don't come up with something, we're goners." Philip's jaw suddenly sagged as he stared at them. "You know what I think?" he said suddenly. "I think we've been prize idiots. We've gotten so rattled we haven't used our heads, and all the time it's been sitting there blinking at us." "What are you talking about?" snapped Jake. "Uncle bodies," said Philip. "Oh, great God!" "No, I'm serious." Philip's eyes were very bright. "How many of those students do you think we can corral to help us?" Coffin gulped. 600. They're out there in the street right now howling for a lynching." "All right, I want them in here. And I want some monkeys. Monkeys with colds. The worse colds, the better." "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" asked Jake. "None in the least," said Philip happily, "except that it's never been done before. But maybe it's time we tried following our noses for a while." The tidal wave began to break 2 days later. Only a few people here, a dozen there, but enough to confirm the direst newspaper predictions. The boomerang was completing its circle. At the laboratory, the doors were kept barred, the telephones disconnected. Within, there was a bustle of feverish, if odorous, activity. For the 3 researchers, the olfactory acuity had reached agonizing proportions. Even the small gas masks Philip had devised could no longer shield them from the constant barrage of odors. But the work went on in spite of the smell. Truckloads of monkeys arrived at the lab, cold-ridden monkeys, sneezing, coughing, weeping, wheezing monkeys by the dozen. Culture trays bulged with tubes overflowed the incubators and work tables. Each day, 600 angry students paraded through the lab, arms exposed, mouths open, grumbling, but cooperating. At the end of the first week, half the monkeys were cured of their colds and quite unable to catch them back. The other half had new colds and couldn't get rid of them. Philip observed this fact with grim satisfaction and went about the laboratory mumbling to himself. 2 days later, he burst forth jubilantly, lugging a sad-looking puppy under his arm. It was like no other puppy in the world. This puppy was sneezing and snuffling with a perfect howler of a cold. The day came when they injected a tiny droplet of milky fluid beneath the skin of Philip's arm, and then got the virus spray and gave his nose and throat a liberal application. Then they sat back and waited. They were still waiting 3 days later. "It was a great idea," Jake said gloomily, flipping a bulging notebook closed with finality. "It just didn't work, that's all." Philip nodded. Both men had grown thin with pouches under their eyes. Jake's right eye had begun to twitch uncontrollably whenever anyone came within 3 yards of him. "We can't go on like this, you know. The people are going wild." "Where's Coffin?" "He collapsed 3 days ago. Nervous prostration. He kept having dreams about hangings." Philip sighed. "Well, I suppose we'd better just face it. Nice knowing you, Jake. Pity it had to be this way." "It was a great try, old man. A great try." "Ah, yes. Nothing like going down in a blaze of..." Philip stopped dead, his eyes widening. His nose began to twitch. He took a gasp, a larger gasp, as a long dead reflex came sleepily to life, shook his head, reared back. Philip sneezed. He sneezed for 10 minutes without a pause until he lay on the floor, blue-faced and gasping for air. He caught hold of Jake, wringing his hand as tears gushed from his eyes. He gave his nose an enormous blow and headed shakily for the telephone. "It was a simple enough principle," he said later to Ellie as she spread mustard on his chest and poured more warm water into his foot bath. "The cure itself depended upon it, the antigen-antibody reactoid.